This is the European History Lecture for Thursday, the 17th of February, the year of our Lord 2022. And as a class, can you read the squiggly letters above the blue?
Quiz
Friday. 3, 2, 1.
Quiz Friday.
There's no next.
No, there's no next day. It's tomorrow. I almost came this close to giving you a pop quiz today, but I decided that it will be next week. Or not next week. Stop. It will be next class. That would be tomorrow. And it will be on everything up to the Victorian Era. So it will be about Italian and German unification. Yes?
So are we going to stop at the Victorian Era today and not
No.
talk about
No, we're going to go ahead. It's just you're going to have your quiz tomorrow.
I know.
See, the fact that you're discommoded by it makes me happy because I'm a teacher.
I'm
There's
so
a
excited
sadist
that we're
inside of every one of us. Wants to spread pain and destruction. So, Germany has been unified. And despite Bismarck's best efforts in unifying Germany, the Germans made a perpetual enemy of the French by taking Alsace-Lorraine. And secondarily, by giving them a ridiculously heavy burden of indemnity to pay. This is not what Bismarck wanted. And Bismarck would have to pay for this indulgence for the rest of his political life, which is until 1894. It's a long time. So, let's talk about why. France now has a new government. It's no longer the Second Empire. It's the Third Republic. So there's the First Republic, the Second Republic, and the Third Republic. The Third Republic is going to last roughly from the Franco-Prussian War up through World War II. And there'll be a brief Fourth Republic, and we're now in the French Fifth Republic. The Third Republic has a few unifying ideas. One of them is revanche, revenge against the Germans, against the Boche. And France, for the entire period after the Franco-Prussian War, is desperately trying to grasp onto any foreign alliance they can to strengthen their position, because France alone can't take Germany. Germany is too populous, too heavily industrialized, too militarized, and France is too divided against itself. France needs allies if it's going to survive in conflict with Germany. Bismarck's job for the rest of his life is to prevent this from happening. So his method for doing this, I will write it up here in orange, is what is called the Three Emperors League. It's also known in German as the Drei Kaiser Bund. The Three Emperors League is an alliance that Bismarck makes between Germany, German Empire, Austria-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Russia, the Russian Empire. So the houses of Hohenzollern, Habsburg, and Romanov come together as the Drei Kaiser Bund, the Three Emperors League, to maintain conservatism in Central and Eastern Europe. And for a while, Bismarck can sell this. The British don't want alliance with anyone because they're at the peak of their power. And this way they can avoid getting drawn into continental entanglements and concentrate on building their empire. They follow a policy called Splendid Isolation. This leaves the French out of luck for decades, until Bismarck gets old and is ultimately replaced. Now, this is a hard sell. The primary reason is the Balkans. The Balkan Peninsula, which is the peninsula that ends in Greece and goes north to the lower Danube and the Carpathian Mountains, the region that today includes Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Serbia, Montenegro, and Greece, as well as Turkey and Europe, is a region so divided religiously, ethnically, culturally, that the word Balkanization means that something that had been unified has become hopelessly divided, Humpty Dumptyified. Balkanization. And in the Balkans, it is typical for every valley to have a mixed population of different ethnic groups, different religious groups. And despite what our liberal progressive idealist friends tell us, diversity is not strength. Diversity is often a cause for mutual acrimony and hatred, especially if you have to live with people cheek by jowl. So the ethnic hatreds that exist in the Balkans go back to Ottoman times, when the Ottoman Empire ruled the whole area. They go back to Byzantine times, when the Eastern Roman Empire ruled the whole area. They go back to Roman times and beyond. Now, Austria's great drive to the east is really a drive to the southeast, and Austria has been expanding into the Balkans for centuries. And their ambition is very clear. They want the Balkans under their control. And that includes all those ethnic groups. But some of those ethnic groups, like the Serbs, are, how can I call this? They're Slavs. Now, the Slavs are the ethnic group of Indo-Europeans in the Central and Eastern European region. Slavs exist east of Germany. The Poles are Slavs, but they're Roman Catholics. Lithuanians are Slavs, Latvians are Slavs, Estonians are Slavs, White Russians are Slavs, Ukrainians are Slavs, Romanians are Slavs, Serbs are Slavs, and Russians are Slavs. Slavs tend to be pale-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. But they're recessive traits, so not every Slav has blonde hair and blue eyes. Most have pale skin. It's an ethnic group. Now, one would think that Slavs, Germans, and Scandinavians sharing those traits would look the same. But to people from that part of the world, no, they don't. It's like a Westerner who doesn't have much experience with Orientals goes to Asia and confuses Han Chinese, with Northern Han Chinese, from Southern Han Chinese, from Taiwanese to Korean to Japanese to Vietnamese to Filipino to Cambodian. All of these groups, and many more, may seem to an outsider to be Asians. But in fact, they are distinct from one another. And if you're from that part of the world, you can usually tell. I can usually tell whether somebody is Han Chinese, Korean, Japanese, or Vietnamese. But it's not 100% foolproof. So, while to an outsider, the Slavic identity may be difficult to ascertain, here are some commonalities. Except for the Poles, the Slavs are largely Greek or Eastern or Russian Orthodox or Serbian Orthodox Christians. So they're not part of the same tradition that produces the Protestant Reformation or the Roman Catholic Church. Slavs tend to share a language group. Slavs obviously have cultural traits. They have legends. They have literature. They have poetry, they have music, like any other European group of peoples. Because the Serbs are Slavs, deep in the heart of the Balkans, the Russians, in so many words, take Serbia, after it becomes independent from the Turks, under their wing. Do not worry, little Slavic brethren. We will take care of you. We will help you. Yes, my Russian accent stinks. I know it. So the Serbs benefit from Russian protection, Russian interest, Russian affection even. And because of this, the Austrian drive to take over the Balkans is obnoxious to Russia. There's also this. Russia is a land power. Under Peter the Great, the Russians get a window onto the west with St. Petersburg in the Baltic. And ultimately they conquer most of the Baltic region, including Finland for a while. Under Catherine the Great, the Russian Empire expands to the northern shore of the Black Sea, including the Crimea, taking the Ukraine. The Russians have a problem. St. Petersburg is a port that freezes in the winter, most of the time. And it's also in an oceanic bottleneck, the Baltic Sea. The Russians have ports on the Black Sea, Odessa particularly, and Sevastopol, but the Black Sea is in a basically cul-de-sac, a choked-off bottleneck of the sea because they've got to go through the Dardanelles to get to the Aegean Sea, to get to the Mediterranean Sea, and then to get anywhere else. And Vladivostok is so far east, it's not particularly useful, and it also can freeze up. So one long-term goal of Russian foreign policy, and Soviet foreign policy after that, is to get what are called warm water ports. Warm water ports. Warm water ports. You know what would be a great warm water port from a Russian point of view? Constantinople. Constantinople would be a great Russian port. In fact, control of the Dardanelles would give Russia the ability to enter and leave the Black Sea without having to worry about getting choked off by the Turks. So the Russians have a long-term policy to basically absorb Bessarabia, what's now called Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey in Europe, including parts of what are now Greece, in order to get control of as much of this area as possible so that the Russian fleets can project power better and so that Russian maritime trade can improve. But you can't have the Austrians control the Balkans and the Russians control the Balkans simultaneously. That would be impossible. So the Russians back the Serbs as their proxies, and the Austrians try absorbing as much as possible. What this means is that the Drei Kaiserbund, the Three Emperors League, is a basket case. Because at times the Austrians force their way into the Balkans, and at other times the Russians force their way into the Balkans. And the Germans end up irritating both groups by trying to balance the equation and keep them both friendly. But Bismarck manages to do it. And so long as the Russians are German allies and the Austrians are German allies, the French are out of luck. When Bismarck's gone, all of this is going to change. None of this would have been necessary if the French hadn't been humiliated the way they were with the loss of Alsace-Lorraine and with the loss, with the indemnity. I'm not saying the French would have loved the Germans. The French don't love the Germans, even today. And the Germans don't particularly love the French. They get along today because they need to. But there's a difference between looking down on your neighbors and disliking them in sort of a casually ethnocentric way and truly wanting hateful revenge to be visited upon them with every fiber of your being. And with Bismarck losing the argument, that's the way France is towards Germany. Remember this the next time you win something. Being reasonably magnanimous in victory, winning and then not taking everything you can, winning and then being a gracious victor, has rewards, as we will see looking ahead into history. But the rest of Germany outside of Bismarck is not worried about this because Germany now bestrides Europe like a colossus. Remember, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world is the Colossus of Rhodes, a giant statue. Sort of like the Statue of Liberty, but male and with legs on either side of the harbor entrance, so ships literally have to sail or row their way between the legs of the Colossus. A Colossus is synonymous with a giant of power, a titan among midgets. And Germany is that. Germany has the Ruhr. Germany has a bigger population than anyone outside of Russia. And that population, unlike the population of Austria-Hungary, is ethnically, linguistically, and culturally unified, except for a few Poles in the east, and a few Frenchmen in Alsace-Lorraine, and a few Danes in Schleswig-Holstein. The German people also feel a new sense, a thrill, if you will, in this unity. They are in charge of their destiny. They are able to be on the stage of first-rate powers. They are the future. In fact, German industry begins to catch up, and by the turn of the 20th century, will have overtaken the British, who at that point up till that point had been the world leaders, especially in industries like steel, which are going to be the industries of war of the coming 20th century. So Germany is feeling its oats. It's young, it's vigorous, it feels the need to take action. And Bismarck is a wise ruler. And one of the wisdoms of Otto von Bismarck is pretty amazingly contradictory. Bismarck is a Junker. He is an East Elbian aristocrat. He comes from the Teutonic Knights background, where they look upon their own peasants as a conquered people. He is a reactionary monarchist who rules his king and unified Germany through war. He is absolutely as right-wing as you get. He's farther to the right than I am, and I don't admit that often because I'm not a monarchist. In the 1870s and 80s, Bismarck builds the world's first modern welfare state. What that means is Bismarck sets up a social welfare net with workman's comp, labor rights, workplace safety rules, sick days, holidays. Bismarck steals the thunder of the socialists and communists on the left, who say that everything they do is in the name of improving the lives of the working class, right? And Bismarck, the ultimate right-winger, gives the workers a much better life through government welfare programs. Workers are no longer in terror of getting sick because they have sick days. They have some government compensation for when they get injured or for when they're too old to work. The Germans under Bismarck are the first people on earth to set up this sort of modern social safety net against poverty, against injury. It's not the modern welfare state with womb-to-the-tomb care like the French have or the Swedes have, but it is by far the most progressive welfare state in the world, and it remains so for decades. Yes?
Speaking of workman's comp, my dad last week just fell off the scaffolding and it was probably like 10 feet high, and he ended up he was trying to go between this two different sets of scaffolding. It's 6 feet. So he took a big step and slipped, and his foot got caught in one of the poles, and he ended up landing on his neck. The only thing that happened was they said he sprained his ankle, but he's walking now fine, and that was 3 days ago.
Thank the Lord.
And so, workman's comp helped with that.
Yeah, no, it will. Over the years, I've had to file 1 or 2 workman's comp claims myself. Tina had to as well. It's just one of those things. Life. It's every so often in life you get injured. So Bismarck actually doesn't make a bunch of red and pink lefties turn conservative, but he does make a lot of German workers who tend to be more nationalistic and patriotic not only reconciled to this new German empire, but actively engaged in supporting it. If the left's primary thing is to make the lives of working people better, Bismarck does a better job than any of them. So this is further going to strengthen the new German empire. However, while Bismarck rules in Prussia from the around 1860-61 until 1894, that's a long time. It's 33 years. It's a long time. He does get old. The world does change. Now, when old King Wilhelm dies, Bismarck's days are numbered. Whatever is going to happen. The son of old King Wilhelm is Prince Friedrich, who becomes Kaiser Friedrich, Emperor Frederick. And Emperor Frederick, remember, has Queen Victoria's eldest daughter as his wife, and he's a notorious liberal. And Bismarck's afraid that he's going to turn Germany into another Britain, a liberal constitutional monarchy. Bismarck doesn't want that, but there's not much he can do about it, except try to influence the son of Frederick and Princess Victoria, who's also named Wilhelm. Now, little Wilhelm, who's going to be Kaiser Wilhelm II, is born with difficulty, and he has a permanently withered left arm. The left arm is completely out of proportion with the rest of his body. It's like a child's arm grafted onto what becomes a man's body. Now, Wilhelm habitually is seen grasping his sword with his left hand, and he's always posed, when he's emperor anyway, in such a way as to make this, he doesn't hide it like Photoshop or anything, but he does, he learns to move and de-emphasize it. He basically is a one-armed guy for all intents and purposes. This little wither arm doesn't do much. But, as liberal as Princess Victoria and Prince Frederick are, when Wilhelm is growing up, they are proper Victorian parents. And proper Victorian parents believe that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. They are not going to raise little Willie to be a weakling, to be indulged, to have his special needs accommodated for. No. They give Wilhelm to a tutor named Hinz-Peter. Hinz-Peter is notorious for his discipline. One of the things Hinz-Peter does is he has to teach the young prince how to ride, because a king needs to properly ride a horse, an emperor even more so. Now, you try to imagine getting on and getting off a horse and riding a horse with one arm. People learn to do it, but it's not easy. And the boy Wilhelm hated it. It was painful, especially when Hinz-Peter got a metal brace that he put on Wilhelm when he was in the saddle to keep him rigidly in an upright posture while riding the horse. Imagine riding the horse while being in a metal back brace. And if Wilhelm made any complaints, now, most people in those times raised their children with what today could be called brutality. But this is going to shape Wilhelm. He doubles down. He is going to find it within himself to survive this and overcome this. And it makes him extremely willful, because he has to find a way to live within that partially damaged body. Wilhelm is not a fan of his mom and not a fan of his dad. And Bismarck becomes like Uncle Otto to him. And so Bismarck is trying to bypass the liberal Friedrich and Victoria by getting to the grandson who will eventually inherit and teaching him to be a good Bismarckian conservative. Wilhelm likes Bismarck. But after a while, something happens. Just as the old king dies, Prince Friedrich is struck with a terrible, debilitating disease. He is bedridden for his entire time, which is about 100 days. So Prince Friedrich, Kaiser Friedrich, Emperor Frederick, is emperor for about 100 days, and during that time he is bedridden and he has to speak through a speaker tube because he has problems breathing and speaking. So it's like a horn they put up to his throat, and he speaks as loudly as he can, and somebody's listening at the horn. This is the new emperor. This is the guy who is going to liberalize Germany, move it away from its Prussian militarism. He lasts barely 100 days, and then he dies. On the day he dies, Wilhelm II, who's a young man, in his 20s, marches troops into his parents' palace to take his mother's papers. Because he's afraid that she's going to embarrass him now that he's the emperor. In effect, he doesn't put his mom in prison, but he makes it clear that she is not going to have free access to the press. She is not going to be involved in politics. She is going to be sidelined. Wilhelm, when he becomes Kaiser, when he becomes emperor, makes two addresses. His first is to his beloved army. His second is to his people. Wilhelm famously says of the future, "We want a place in the sun. It's full steam ahead." And he's called the Young Conductor because, like a locomotive man, he's turning up the steam and making the train go faster. He has energy. He travels all over Germany. He makes speeches. He rides. He is very physically vigorous despite his withered left arm. But Bismarck seems to be holding him back. Bismarck with his caution. Bismarck with his advice. Wilhelm wants to rule. So in 1894, Bismarck fires him. In 1894, Bismarck pulls with young Wilhelm II what he used to do with Wilhelm's grandfather. "Well, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to resign." "Best wishes in your retirement, old man. Thank you." That's the response. Bismarck is shocked, but what's he going to do? He's already resigned. He didn't expect the resignation to be accepted. The old king would have burst into tears and kept Bismarck around. But the grandson wants to rule without any partners. So he accepts Bismarck's resignation. There's a very famous comic from the newspapers at the time, Dropping the Pilot. Now, when an ocean ship is at sea, the captain commands the ship, the navigator and the helmsman move the ship across the seas. But when a ship is approaching a harbor that has particular tidal conditions, particular rocks, every harbor is incredibly complex and incredibly different. Somebody comes out from the harbor, boards the ship, and commands the steering of the ship into dock. That's called the harbor pilot. The harbor pilot keeps the ship from going onto the rocks. Dropping the pilot, you see young Emperor William with a fancy crown and a spiked mustache looking down, and you see tired old Bismarck, but still strong and proud, walking down the stairs towards his little boat because he's no longer needed. Dropping the Pilot is about a changing of leadership in Germany. Now that's where we're going to leave this. Well, no, I'll go on because I said seeds of doom. Wilhelm drops the dry Kaiserbund. Or should I say, he's not willing to deal with the Russians in a way that will keep them in it. Wilhelm is partial to the Austrians. He thinks that the alliance with Russia is unnatural. Besides, he wants to stretch his wings and become a power, and the Russians just... So Wilhelm lets the Three Emperors League die. Within just a few years. Actually, it's not very long. Within a year, the French are developing a new alliance with the Russians called the Dual Alliance. It's the basis for the World War I Allied Alliance. Russia and France become buddies. And what does Kaiser Wilhelm do by dropping the Three Emperors League just because it's too fuddy-duddy, he makes much more likely a future war that is going to have two fronts, a Western front against France and an Eastern front against Russia. That's a much harder fight for Germany than just a war against one or the other. It suddenly places France in a position to actually get closer to revanche, because with their alliance, their new alliance with Russia, the French actually have a chance to win. So dropping the pilot does have certain doomy qualities. Now, any questions on the unification of Italy or Germany before we shift gears into something else? Okay, I see no questions except Portia.
Sorry. Did Bismarck just live out the rest of his days?
Yeah, he retired quietly. He there were times when he had a temper about it all, and people talked to him. It's like that little whippersnapper. How dare he? But there were other times where he was very old and he was very fat, and he had his wife, he had his family, he had his estate, he had his dogs. He liked dogs, and he basically lived his life and then died. No, he didn't. He didn't politically fight it. He had accomplished really most of what he set out to do. In fact, he had accomplished much more than anyone would have thought. He arrives as the Prime Minister of Prussia in a divided Germany without any hope of really coming together, and he makes that happen. And he also makes the new Germany so strong. And he even reconciles the working class. Those are some amazing accomplishments. Bismarck is an annoying fellow, no question. He's a bit like Trump in this respect. And I'm not trying to, but no, I voted for Trump in 2020. I did not in 2016. I voted for a third candidate because I was put off by Trump. What I've learned, Trump was obnoxious. Bismarck was obnoxious. Trump did things that shocked people because they seemed so rude. Bismarck did things that shocked people because they seemed so rude. But from a conservative point of view, Trump governed better than any president since Ronald Reagan, who's my hero. I had to acknowledge that. So he's an obnoxious guy who can get things done. Bismarck, even if you don't like him, even if you don't like his politics, was very good for Germany in the sense that he unified it and reconciled it and kept it safe for his entire 33-year tenure. So, yeah, that's my answer. Yes?
Did Wilhelm II keep up Bismarck's socialism?
Yeah. In fact, one of the complaints the Germans had against the English-speaking peoples, the Americans and the British, is that we were cruel capitalists because we didn't protect our working classes enough. But Germans believe in everyone coming together. So Wilhelm, who's a Kaiser, actually criticizes us in the West for not being socialistic enough because we don't care about our poorest people. We exploit them. And Wilhelm could use the German welfare state as an argument that says that, yeah, Germany still has an emperor, but Germany takes care of its own in a way that England and the United States don't.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. You're going to ask about Trudeau, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we have time at the end.
You said that yesterday.
I did, and we didn't. We'll see if we have more time today. Okay. The 1800s is called the Victorian Era in the English-speaking world because Queen Victoria of the British Empire, Empress of India, has such a long reign. As a I think 16 or 17-year-old girl in 1837, her uncle, King William, dies, and she becomes queen. She's a teenager. That's a lot of responsibility. She reigns until 1901. So let's see. That's 64 years. The only English monarch to live to reign longer is the current queen, Elizabeth II, who became queen in 1954. So Queen Victoria, because she reigns for so long over the most powerful empire in the world, by far, Because Britain is the first industrial country, and Britain uses that industrial power to expand its empire, and British economics dominate the 19th century. British ideas of free trade dominate the 19th century. Britain is, in the middle and late 1800s, what even more than the United States has been after World War II, a central pivot of the world system. Britain helps build the world system. So it's the Victorian era in honor of Britain's monarch. Now, Queen Victoria is deeply in love with her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, another German prince. And they marry. It is what it is. And because they're royalty, no one's going to say no about who she marries. Well, they could, but they don't, because he is of the best, highest nobility in Germany. And, well, in any event, she marries this guy. And by all accounts, he is the love of her life. He is her partner in the work. He makes being queen bearable. They have an office together where their desks are right up against one another, and they both do work, the paperwork of the crown, and they talk to one another, and they're partners. Now, she is queen. She gets the last word. She's the monarch. He is the prince consort. He is not king. She inherited, because the British don't have a Salic law, the British allow female monarchs. Remember Queen Elizabeth I, Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth II. But still, she gives him important things to do, like the Great London Exhibition, where they build a crystal palace of iron and glass. Gravity still works, thank you. They have children. Princess Victoria, who ends up marrying the Prussian princes, just one of them. They have a couple of sons, an heir and a spare. But then he dies young. He dies, I think, in or around 1860, somewhere early in the reign. She wears black for the rest of her life. She is in mourning for the rest of her life. She withdraws from a lot of public events for the rest of her life. And she's alive, again, until 1901. So we're talking mourning for 40-odd years. That's a long time. She is known for being very straight-laced. In fact, in America and Britain, to this day, calling somebody Victorian means they're a sexual prude, that they've got no idea about people having fun. There's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, where when she was talking about the laws against homosexuality in Britain, and there were laws against homosexuality in Britain until the late 1960s, this gives you an idea of how far we've come in terms of that. Somebody asked her if they should include overtly lesbians in that, which is homosexual women. And she scoffed and said, there are no such things, not in my kingdom. There were. So, Victorians practice what is called absolute morality. That is the dominant idea. Absolute morality is the belief that there is an objective right and wrong. That it's not about culture, it's not about opinion, it's not about generational ideas. There's right, there's wrong, there's good, there's evil, there's white, there's black, and everyone can tell the difference. This idea that there are shades of gray, and that makes up most of the world, is just something evil says to get people to put up with it. Absolute morality is a conviction that we know what we should and should not do, and that everyone on some level knows this. Now, the Victorians in Britain, France, Germany, Russia, throughout the Western world have this sense of absolute morality. If you read the letters from the American Civil War, from soldiers and generals, the newspapers, if you read the speeches of Abraham Lincoln, which are good speeches, by the way, you will see in them something that we no longer have. A sense of moral clarity. A sense that we all together understand life. A sense of shared vision and purpose. You know what kills that in the West? The First World War. And then the Second World War kicks the corpse. Up until the First World War, the Western world had a very clear sense of right and wrong and itself in the world. The rest of the world was primitive savages. Even societies like India, China, Japan, the Middle East, they weren't industrial. They may be advanced, but they're no more advanced than the Romans and Greeks were. It is the Western world, the European world, the British world, the French, the German worlds that develop factories, that develop manufacturing that can free us from poverty and famine and want, that can build ships that don't need the wind or rowers, but that can move by paddle or by propeller, that can build guns that can shoot out to the horizon and beyond. We were given this. Why? Because with all of our flaws, we are a Christian people. We are a decent people. We are worthy of God's trust to bring civilization to the benighted regions of the world. Now, just saying these things, I understand the culture you all grew up in, almost. And what I understand is moral relativism is baked into everything in the modern world. This sense, who are you to judge? This sense of, well, yeah, I'm going to say what I think is the truth, but I'm sorry, I'm going to say what I think is the truth. It's just what I think is the truth. The idea of a leader standing up with moral clarity is very rare. In our society, it's very rare because people are very quick to say, oh, you're a hypocrite. You've got feet of clay. You don't understand the truth. You just understand your truth, not the truth. So the idea of moral relativism is just baked into us. The difference between the Victorians and us on this point is the First World War, which I will explain why. This industrialism and the conviction that we are the agents of civilization is going to encourage Europe to conquer the world. Quinine helps in that it allows us to survive malarial jungles. But in Victorian times, the entire planet, except for a couple of places, I mean less than a handful, is brought under European dominion in one way or another, is brought into the Western world. Everywhere in the planet, societies outside of Europe have three historical epochs. Pre-contact with Europeans, the age when they were under European rule, and post-colonial. Everywhere else on Earth. History is divided into those three eras because the European conquest of the planet is so dramatic, so important. So that's where we're going to leave it. We'll go into things in detail later. Before we go into the optional discussion, does anyone have any questions, comments, or thoughts on what I've said about Victorian morality or anything else? Okay, you realize that by not asking, you are opening the floor to Haley's discussion of Canadian current events. And you will get a chance to participate if you raise your hand. Ms. Velasco, proceed with your question. What? Yes.
So since she married the her first
Oh,
husband,
yeah.
right? So wasn't he in line for the German throne, or did
No, he was not. His Saxe-Coburg-Gotha are part of the lesser states. So he was going to be no. He was not a Hohenzollern.
Okay.
So he wasn't going to rule. But by the way, the closest in blood is going to produce a birth defect called hemophilia, which is going to doom Russia. And I'm not exaggerating. The hemophilia that is brought into the Romanov family through that union with the Victorian heir dooms Russia. It's part of what dooms Russia to communism. Go.
All right. So, what is your opinion about the fact that Justin Trudeau is ordering banks to freeze accounts of those who are participating.
Well, why don't you briefly tell me your opinion before I tell you mine?
So I think that is very simply tyrannical. And
You say heretical?
no, tyrannical.
Say that again?
Tyrannical.
Tyrannical. Okay. Por qué? Why?
Because it's just like he's just like, I'm gonna control your life. So if you're participating in in this protest for like freedom,
Yeah.
we're gonna take all your money.
Yep. Does anyone have an opinion on that before I weigh in with mine, Mr. Sam?
So I think I'm not sure what the laws in Canada are, but if this whole protest is permitted, then I do think what's going on is tyrannical. You're saying you're condemning and villainizing what is legal, what is you deemed as correct and okay, and you're villainizing that and saying, okay, we're gonna make that we're setting what I think what it does is it sets a precedent for any future protests, and you're basically it's the first step into totalitarianism.
Do we know how much these protests have actually affected the supply line into Canada?
There was a brief time when the bridge between Detroit and Windsor was closed by allies of the Freedom Convoy. The real Freedom Convoy is in Ottawa, which is not on the border. That was opened up within the last few days. No, we don't have, I'm sure somebody has figures. I don't. But the supply chain problems that we've been facing are not because of Canada. They're because of China and the global pandemic.
I was
and a bunch
referencing
of other
just into
things.
Canada, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts before I give you mine? This Prime Minister, yesterday in Parliament, said, so the Conservative Party, which is against my emergency decree, is for people with who fly Confederate flags and swastikas. A female representative from the Conservative side says, really? You know I'm Jewish. My ancestors, and I do have ancestors who died in the Holocaust. It is rich that, and I think she called him this little pipsqueak. She called him something. Has the nerve to tell me that I'm a supporter of the swastika. There is a problem with what's going on in Canada in this sense. This man backed BLM protests in Canada. They happened there too. This man backed Antifa protests in Canada. They happened there too. That was all dissent, which liberals have told me since I was a child is the highest form of patriotism. But now, because it's conservatives protesting, they're cracking down as if it's a violent revolution. He has not spoken to his people, or the truckers. He has not negotiated. He has done nothing but demonize, vilify. No one in Canadian history has seized these kind of powers. No one. And it's not over a rebellion. It's not over an armed insurrection. It's not over a world war. It's because a group of truckers are making him look bad. It really is such an overreaction. And it is so outside of the Canadian norms. Now, I will say this. I have heard rumors that one of the reasons Trudeau did this is because our president, after his experience with the January 6th insurrection, encouraged Trudeau to slam the door shut hard on the truckers because Biden didn't want similar things happening here in the United States. Well, I predict that similar things will happen here in the United States. Civil disobedience is a part of our birthright as American citizens. We do not have to always obey the laws, especially if the laws are immoral or unjust. Our country started in revolution against what we called unjust laws. To seize martial law powers, to me, is a sign of weakness. Anyway, the world is watching. Thank you. Have a good day.